So before I really go any further, I want to kind of get a feel for what your feelings on some of these subjects are. So how many people here are concerned about greenhouse gas emissions and climate change? Say 2/3 of the audience. And how many people drive a car? Because actually there's 2 in my house, so I'll put my hands up twice. Actually, only about half. That's quite impressive. So for those of you that do, I should have said a car or a motorbike, actually, the same difference if you're using a motorbike. Of those of you that do have a car or a motorbike, how many of you partly fuel that car through biofuels? Okay. So it's a trick question. It is a trick question. So I have news for you, and I hope it's good news. Actually, anybody that uses conventional unleaded fuel, not the premium stuff, but the normal unleaded fuel or diesel in the UK at the moment is probably using about 5% of the fuel that they use is biofuels. It comes from either biodiesel or bioethanol, and it's already in the pump at source when you buy your petrol or buy your diesel. And it's already having quite a big impact. In fact, it's been estimated that just in the 6 months between April and October last year, that 5% use of biofuels in the UK transportation fuel mix in those 6 months saved something like 100 million tonnes of carbon being emitted back out into the atmosphere. So you can all feel a little bit more relaxed that you're doing your bit for the environment and you don't need to worry so much about driving home this evening. But obviously we can do a lot better than that over the next 5 years or so. That 5% is supposed to increase gradually to 10% in the fuel mix. But actually the fact that many of you have been using these biofuels without even realising it illustrates one of the great advantages that biofuels have over other potential sources of renewable transportation. And that is that it can plug in immediately into the existing infrastructure. It can be distributed in tankers in the same way that our normal liquid fuels are. It can be put in at source and it can come out in the petrol pump and go into your cars in the same way that normal petrol does. Your car doesn't need any adaptation, doesn't need a different engine, and it's not going to cost you any more to buy a car that can use 10% biofuels as it costs you to buy an ordinary car. It's exactly the same thing. So this is one of the huge benefits of first generation biofuels. These are by first generation I mean the kind of fuels that we have already. But there's also an awful lot of concerns about the use of some of these first generation biofuels, and I'm sure some of you are aware of what some of those concerns are. Does anybody have specific concerns about first gen biofuels? I mean, just shout out what you're concerned about if anybody does. Okay.
So is one of the concerns displacing food production?
I think that's one of the major concerns, and it's certainly one of the major concerns that I sympathise a lot with. I'm going to talk about that in a second, because that's exactly why we're trying to arrive at a stage where we can make biofuels from non-food parts of plants. Any other major concerns anyone would like me to address?
An environmental impact by freeing up land that you could use to generate or to grow these crops for biofuel purposes.
I think that's absolutely right as well. So there's this whole issue of indirect land use change, that if we use up more land to produce grain for biofuels, that there may be less left for food production again. And so it's for these kinds of reasons that there's a lot of research going on at the moment into trying to produce fuel from parts of plants that are not foods. And that's exclusively what my research is about. Although I do think, this is obviously a thoughtful audience, people who come out on a Monday night to hear about science. I think people like you should go beyond some of the very trite analysis that you read about this subject in some of the media and the newspapers. For example, we already have an absolutely booming billion-dollar bioethanol industry in Scotland that employs 35,000 people. It's not making transportation fuel, but it's certainly not putting food into the mouths of the starving hungry. It's making a luxury product, and you never hear anybody questioning why we're putting grain into whiskey production. So I'm not suggesting, and I really personally believe that we have to move away from using grain and food products to make biofuel, and I believe we'll have to do that increasingly as the planet moves towards 9 billion people of population in 2050. But I don't want you to think that I'm saying that all first generation biofuels are bad. I don't believe that, I don't think that. I think they have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And there can be an awful lot of, hypocrisy almost about some of the things that you read in the media about this. But nevertheless, having said that, I really believe that the future is in using non-food sources of biomass for fuel production. And my own research is particularly involved with trying to use agricultural waste, things like straw or grain husks that are the byproduct of food production. So if we can use those to produce fuels from, then we're actually improving the economic competitiveness and the incentive for food production. And we're also reducing the carbon dioxide emissions of food production, which is actually quite an important thing to do, because agriculture in the UK is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. So we can improve the carbon balance of food production.